Are you ready to build the ultimate A/B testing setup? In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to bring together Next.js, Sanity, and GrowthBook. So let's get into it. All right, so here is a preview of what we're going to build. So let's take a look at the screen here. On one side, we have an A version of a product page for a camera store. And so you can see it's the Sony a7 IV. And it has that kind of stock title with a stock image and then just a pretty generic description. And so you can see all those are the A version of this test. And then on the other side, we have a different title, the Sony of your dreams, with a more engaging image showing someone using it, and then some more engaging text. And what's so cool is that all of this is set up right in Sanity. So here I have that image, then compared it to the variation down here, as well as the description. So all of that is being set up right in Sanity. And then I can go over to GrowthBook and I can see here that the experiment is running. And right now the add to cart actions, if that's what we were testing, the variation is losing. So this kind of more engaging title is losing to the control by 3%. Of course, this is all just fake data, but it shows you how cool that this can be for setting up an A/B test. So let's see how to do it. All right, before we get started, there's going to be a few things that you need. So first, you're going to want to make sure that you have Node version 20 or higher installed. So you can check that in your terminal by doing node-v. So we can see that Node's installed. You're also going to want to have a GrowthBook account. You can sign up for free. You're also going to need a Sanity account. You can also sign up for free here. And then it'll be helpful to have some basic knowledge of Next.js and React. That'll help you get things going much quicker. All right, let's now get Next.js set up. So I'm in my terminal here, and I am going to paste in the command to create a new Next.js app. So we have this in the docs where you can copy it, hit enter and let it go. And then I'm going to just pick all of the defaults here, and it is initializing my project. Great, so it created my project and I can change directories into it, and Next.js is now set up. All right, now that Next.js is set up, let's add Sanity to it. So in my Next.js directory, I'm going to paste in the command to init a new Sanity project. And what's cool about this here is that it's going to embed Sanity Studio, where you can manage all your content right into Next.js. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed with that. It will then prompt you to create a new account with Sanity if you don't have one. I do already, and I'm already logged in, so this is all set up. And then I can create a new project or select one of my existing ones. You can see that I have lots of different versions of this tutorial that I've gone through. I'm going to go ahead and choose Camera World. And I am going to use the existing dataset, but you could also create a new dataset. I'm going to choose yes for all of the defaults and just keep going. I'm going to have a clean project with no predefined schema types. And then I'm going to add the data set to my local env file. So it's installing everything now. All right, great. So Sanity is now installed, and what I'm going to do is add in their personalization plugin. The personalization plugin is really the magic. It's what allows you to do A/B testing, and it has a specific ability to integrate with GrowthBook. So that command I'm going to do here is to install the Sanity plugin. Again, we have all these in our docs, so you don't need to try to copy them here. All right, now that we have Next.js installed, Sanity added to Next.js, and the personalization plugin, let's dive into the code and get everything working together. All right, so now let's open our Sanity Next.js project in a code editor. I am here in Cursor, and you can see some of the Sanity stuff in this Next.js app. In particular, we're going to want to find the config file, and this is where we can import that personalization plugin and tell Sanity about it. So there's two changes that we need to make to this file. The first one is to bring in that personalization plugin. So I'm going to get this line of code here and bring this in. So you can see we're bringing in field level experiments from the Sanity personalization plugin and specifically from the GrowthBook part of it. And then we need to tell Sanity about what it can do. So I'm going to come down here to the plugins area and add this block of code. So this is field level experiments, and it's telling Sanity for the string and image fields, I want to be able to run experiments, and we'll see what that looks like in the Sanity Studio a little bit later. And then it gives us the option to configure the environment and the project. This is stuff that is going to come from GrowthBook, and we'll get that later on. All right, now let's create our schema for the product page. So in the Sanity folder, schema types, let's create a new file, and let's just call this camera.ts. And I'm going to copy in this schema. So we have the schema defined here. You can see it's camera product. We have a slug. We have a title. And here, though, it's really important to see that the type is experiment string. So this is coming from that personalization plugin that we set up. And this is making sure that the title, you're able to provide different variations and run A/B tests with it. So that's what that experiment string is indicating. So we have price, image, and again, this experiment image. We have a description again with an experiment. So this is allowing us to test all three of these elements. And then we have more of the schema kind of all set up. The last part here that I want to call attention to is you see we have this preview field. And the preview field just allows you to customize how this is going to appear in Sanity Studio. And the preview field then gives it a little bit nicer presentation, a little bit more human readable. Now that we created that schema, we need to go into our index file for the schema types and import it. So I can import camera in, and then I can put camera in here, save that up. So now our schema is all set up. The next part is to set up our queries. And so I am going to start a new query here. I'm going to do a new file. And this will be called queries.ts. And let me paste this part in. And so what this is allowing us to do is to fetch that camera products from the Sanity database. So I have here my query, my camera product query, where I'm getting it if the type is camera, the slug is current, so this allows us to filter by the slug, and then it gets the title and the image and the description, which are the fields that I am experimenting on. And this is kind of the magic that allows us to make sure we pull in the appropriate variation for that user ID. And we'll see how this works in a little bit, but now we have all that stuff coming in and we've defined our query, so we can now use this in other parts of our Next.js app. I'm here in my GrowthBook dashboard, and the first thing I want to do is get that data that we need for the personalization plugin. So I can come down here to my projects, which is under settings, and you'll see here I have Camera World down at the bottom. If you need to create a project, you can do so. I will click on Camera World, and you can see up at the top here, it gives you the ID that you need for the app. So I'm going to copy this end of the URL and jump back on over to cursor. And let's see, we want to go into Sanity config, and you can see project here. So I'm going to replace the placeholder with that project ID. The project is optional, so you don't need to include it at all. If you don't, then the experiments and the data that you get in will just be that globally available data in GrowthBook, which is fine if you don't have a lot, but a lot of teams will use projects to organize things across their experimentation program. So that's one part of it. The other part is the environment. So you can see I have 3 different environments here, and so I need to specify where I want this to work in terms of the experimentation. So production is the default, and that's what I'm going to copy here and put this in. So if you wanted to change the environment depending on, whether you were in production or development or staging, you could do that dynamically. Here, we're just going to leave it as production. So now the personalization plugin is all set up. The next part is to create an SDK key in GrowthBook, which will allow the Next.js app to work with GrowthBook data. So we're going to come back to where I was before, the SDK connections. I can click Add SDK connection, and I could say Camera World Sanity, or however you want to call it. And I can pick Node.js here. I'm going to have that environment be what I set up in the Sanity config. I have it filtered by project. So you want this all to line up if you are using these things, to make sure that it all matches. And then you can leave everything else to be the defaults and then click Save. All right, so now our SDK connection is created, and the big thing that you need to get from this page is this client key. And we'll show you in another step back in Next.js where we're going to use this, but just note here that this client key is what you're going to need from this. Now let's get to a really fun part where we get to create a feature flag and an experiment. I'm going to click on features in GrowthBook, and I'm going to click add feature. So this is the name of the feature key. Whatever you want it to be called is fine. I'm going to call it flag Sony camera, because that's what we're kind of working on, but really you can have it be anything you want. You can restrict it to a project or not. And then we're going to choose string here, because that's what we're going to be doing. And our default value will be control. I'm going to enable this in production in dev and then click create. All right, so now we have this feature flag created. Why did we need to create a feature flag? This is what allows us to add experiments. So I can come down here, and you can see right now there aren't any rules, but I can add a rule here and choose experiment. I'm going to create a new experiment. And so I will say the Sony test for my experiment. And then you could add a hypothesis and a description, best practices. We don't need to do it right now though. We can come down here and pick what we want for our values. So the value for the control is just going to be control. And then the value for the variation is just going to be variation. And we'll see how this works in a second, but the idea will be that we're really controlling this with Sanity, not with GrowthBook. This is sort of placeholders that we're going to connect to. It's going to be a 50-50 split, but you could change that if you wanted to. You could also have additional variations if you wanted to. All of this is totally configurable, and we're going to let all these defaults stay here. And then you could even add, if you wanted some more advanced targeting, you could set this up too. So for instance, you could add attribute targeting to only, for instance, target users who are on mobile or in a specific country or whatever you kind of want to do. You're able to do that as well. I'm going to leave all of that as it is. Another part of this that you'll need to set up, and you can see our other docs about this, is your data source. So this is the data warehouse that you want to use to save all the experiment data. And that can be something like BigQuery. That's a popular choice. We also started offering our own managed warehouse that you can check out as well. All of that will be in links below. And I'm going to continue on. So we now have this experiment created. It's only in a draft state, but you can see that we have here the feature flag, Sony camera, with this rule of Sony test experiment on it. I'm going to click review and publish. And now this experiment is live. All right, there is now just one last thing that we need to do in GrowthBook in order for this part of the setup to be complete. And that's to get an API key that we can use with Sanity. So I'm going to come into Sanity here and create an API key. So you can click new secret key. You can change this actually just to read only. And you can call this Sanity key or whatever you want to call it. Click create, reveal it, and then we're going to copy this over to use in Sanity. That wraps up the GrowthBook portion of the configuration. To recap what we did, we created an SDK connection, which we'll see how that works in future steps. we created a feature flag and an experiment. So now we have an experiment running. It's not running anywhere yet. We'll change that. And then we also got an API key to use with Sanity. All right, so let's start now weaving these threads together. Our next step here will be to add our content variations in Sanity. So let's do that. So I'm here in Sanity Studio, and remember that it is part of your Next.js application. So you would just go to your Next.js application. So I'm here on localhost 3001, and then go to Studio. So I already have some of this data set up here, but I'm going to show you what it's like to add a content variation for some of this. So here I am on our Sony, and you can see right here is the title, and there's a default value here for the title. But when I hover over it, there's going to give me this add experiment button because we set up that personalization plugin. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And then what it does is it gives you this option to select an experiment. So remember, we set up that experiment of flag Sony camera. So I can pick that, and then I can add my control and my variation. So I'm going to add my control, and the control value is going to be the same. So A74. I could even just copy the default value there to make it easy. And now that that's set, I'm going to add in my variation. And here I am going to put in Sony of my dreams. Click out of there. So now those variations are set up. And so in the Next.js application, it will pick one of those variations to show depending on the user ID or whatever you're doing to randomize your traffic. All right, so the same thing applies to images. So you can see here I have the experiment set up, so I can actually remove the experiment, but then here is the control and the variation. It's set up the same way. And what's important to note is that you see this variation ID, and that maps to what we set up in GrowthBook. Our last bit of setup is to integrate GrowthBook with our Next.js application. So let's do that now. All right, so I'm in my project, and I'm going to install the GrowthBook SDK. So np install. All right, great. So now that GrowthBook is installed, I need to add it to our Next.js application. So I'm going to jump back over to my code editor. The first part of the GrowthBook integration is to create a helper to configure GrowthBook to work server side. So I'm going to do here a new folder called lib, and inside I'm going to create a new file called growthbookserver.ts, and I'm going to paste in the code here. And what this does is just sets up some helpers, like I said, to be sure that GrowthBook can work server side. So save that file. All right, the next thing we need to set up is some kind of tracking for the experiment exposure. So in that lib folder, I'm going to make a new file. I am going to call it growthbooktracking.tsx. So it's a JSX component. And I'm going to paste in the code here. And let me just walk through really quick what's happening. So you can see that we're using the client component so that this is going to fire on the client, which works better with most analytics suites. And so anytime an experiment runs, right now it's just set up to, it's going to log it to the console. So you'll see that it logs the viewed experiment with the experiment key and a result key. But what you'd want to put in here, and there's an example, is if you're using Google Analytics or Segment or whatever kind of event tracking you're using, you can set that up so that it sends the event that the user saw this variation or that variation, the control or the variant. And then down here it exports this GrowthBook tracking, which we're going to add to our page in a moment. We also need to add some middleware. So I'm going to do middleware.ts and add this in here. And so what this does is basically sets up a user ID that is consistent over page sessions or refreshes, and then make sure that your user always gets the same variation. And you can set this up in different ways if you're using some other service or you have a user ID. There's lots of different ways to configure this. This is just one example. So basically, we're just generating a random user ID and setting that to a cookie. The one last bit to do here is to add your SDK connection to your environment variables. All right, and then I can put this in here. This will be GrowthBook client key equals that value we copied from GrowthBook. And this will let the GrowthBook SDK connect to GrowthBook from Next.js. Now that that is all set up, let's bring it together in the actual page where we're going to run the experiment and see how everything's working. The last step here is to bring everything together into a Next.js page. And this is where the experiment result is rendered. We assign a controller variation to the user. We do kind of all the fun stuff. So let's take a look at this code and see what's going on. All right, so I am here in this page.tsx file in my app directory, and I've set up a folder for a dynamic route that's going to have the slug as that dynamic element. And so in here, we have a bunch of our imports that we need to bring in, a lot of the things we've created in previous steps. So you can take a look at that. I'm going to come down and look at the first kind of const here, which is our experiment flag. Right now, you can see that it is hard-coded, which is fine. It's bringing in the name of that flag that we set up in GrowthBook. You could do something to make this more variable if you wanted. So you could run more experiments more programmatically. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're just going to have flag Sony camera here. Next, in the actual product page template, we are going to configure server-side GrowthBook, bring in that helper that we did that helps set GrowthBook up. Then we initialize GrowthBook here with setting the client key to that environment variable we defined. And one thing to note here that this is a client key, so it's perfectly fine to be public. It doesn't need to be hidden. It just allows you to fetch the flag information, the experiment information from GrowthBook. We do have a dev mode enabled here, so this allows you to use a Chrome extension to help with debugging, but you can also turn this off if you want. And then we init GrowthBook here with a timeout of 1000. Come down, we grab our cookies so that we can use it to set attributes in GrowthBook. And what this means is it's saying that the ID is equal to that cookie value, and then that will be used for assigning the experiment. So whether the person gets the control or the variation will be based on this ID, and we're passing it in here. If you wanted to do other kind of targeting, this is where also you could pass in other attributes. So if you wanted to pass in, for instance, location or something else like that, you could do it here. We then evaluate the actual experiment. So there's the experiment flag here, which is that flag Sony camera, and we're using this helper method of get feature value to evaluate the experiment. So based on then what that ID is, we're going to get either control or variation, and that will be consistent every time. So if someone comes to your page, they're always going to get the control or they're always going to get the variation. If for some reason something doesn't go right, it will fall back to the default value that you set up in Sanity. Then that information is passed to this deferred tracking calls helper. So that's our tracking data. This is what says this user got either the controller variation, and we'll see how that kind of plays out in 1 second. The next part of this is our query params that we're going to use to fetch the data then from Sanity. So you can see here we have the slug. That's just the slug of the page that allows us to know which camera in this instance we're fetching. And then we have some of this data for the different kind of parts of the page that we're running experiments on. So we have the title experiment, we have the description experiment, the image experiment, all of that A and B things that we set up in Sanity. All right, let's come down here. Now we get into the actual template. And I want to show you in particular where we're kind of doing one of these A/B tests. And so we can see here with the image how this is working. So we have data.image. If there is an image, then we're going to serve this image. And you can see that it's just that data that came back from Sanity. And then it's already, because of how we set up the query, going to show the either variant or the control image. So there's nothing special we need to do here. It will be dynamically rendered according to whatever the user attribute ID is. So that's pretty cool. And then you can see a little bit more, just again, title, data.title. This is going to be whatever that value is we set in Sanity, which is pretty cool. And so that's all you need to do for the templating parts of it. It's kind of just how you'd use the data before, but that nice query will give us the control or the variant as needed. All right, we've done all the setup work. And so now it's time to look at what's going on our page. All right, so here we have our Sony A7 IV page. And right now we can see that it is the control that's being served. So I have some logging down here in the corner that says that we're in the A variation or the control. So we get the control title, we get the control description and the control image. And so one way we can now test to see if the variation works as well is to come into our dev tools in the browser and come on over to the application and cookies. And so you can see here that it's using this GB next example cookie. That's what we set up in the middleware. And so this is the user ID that's being passed to GrowthBook. And then based on that, it is either the control or the variation being assigned. So if we update this value, we can force then the variation to come through. So I'm going to use 11111. You might have to try a couple different ones to see. I will refresh here. And so now we can see that we get the variation. So B is down here. So we know that this is the variation. We get the new title, the new image, and the new description. And so we know that the server side A/B testing is working properly with Sanity, GrowthBook, and Next.js. And we can also confirm that by coming on over to the console. And you see here that we get a viewed experiment event. This is what would be replaced by your tracking call, but we can see the experiment ID and the variation. So everything is working together, and you have the foundation for a very robust, very high level experimentation system. There you have it. You have a complete A/B testing setup. Your content team can do A/B tests without asking you for code changes once you have everything set up. I know it is a complex tutorial. There are a lot of moving parts, so feel free to ask questions below. We also have a Slack community that you can join. I respond to everything, so go ahead and ask any questions that you might have. We also, of course, have a documented tutorial where you can get all of the code snippets that you need. That link is below. This setup scales beautifully. You can test anything from just a small button to entire page layouts or algorithms, whatever you want. It's really nice. Thanks for watching and happy experimenting.